This video is about online discussions. Much of the tips and considerations that I talk about in this video came from this book called Discussion in the College Classroom by J.R. Howard. There's a lot of useful information about leading discussions in general, but Chapter 5 is specifically on online discussions. This is a book that Snowden Library has in both print and as an ebook. One of the first questions an instructor should ask themselves when designing an online class, and for this video specifically online discussions, is will the discussions be synchronous, meaning it happens at the same time, or asynchronous, meaning students can participate at a time that works for them? So the first aspect of this is how each happens. For synchronous, discussions could happen through Zoom, Microsoft Teams, or Moodle chat. For asynchronous, discussions could happen on Moodle discussion forums or Perusal. Perusal is an interesting web platform where, with the free version, an instructor could upload a text. For example, this is a text that is available in Project Gutenberg and is the first short story in the English language about vampires. And this is a text that I've used in my first year seminar, and because it is 200 years old, students have struggled to understand main points of the story. If I were to teach this as an online class, I would find this to be a useful tool because I can highlight parts of the text and ask students questions, and students could highlight other parts of the text and ask questions or make comments on that text. So this is a platform that would allow students to have discussions that are focused on very specific parts of a text document. This could be literature, this could be a textbook, or it could be your course syllabus. Of course, there are other platforms that could be used for asynchronous discussion, such as blogs, but these are the ones that I came up with initially. So the next consideration is, what are the advantages of synchronous versus asynchronous learning? So for synchronous learning, a Teams or Zoom discussion is more like an in-person discussion. You can get and give immediate feedback and clarify misunderstandings and have more access to nonverbal communication in addition to the words used. Teams and Zoom will allow you to break up your class into smaller discussion groups. For asynchronous learning, there's the flexibility that students can contribute any time of the day that works for them. Asynchronous discussions allow students, particularly introverts or shy students, time to reflect before they make contributions to the class discussion. With asynchronous discussion, there's less domination by more talkative students. Some students may contribute more than others, but students who contribute a lot do not take away other students' ability to contribute. Furthermore, the professor can more easily require and grade participation when the amount of participation is not limited by the amount available time during the class period. And Moodle also allows you to break students up into smaller discussion groups, which can also encourage individuals to participate more. And finally, we want to look at the disadvantages of each of these choices. For synchronous, the main disadvantage is getting all students together at one time. Additionally, there are a lot of technical challenges, such as Zoom and Teams require a lot of bandwidth. And if that bandwidth is not available, the sound and video quality can be very poor, and it can be very difficult for students or the professor to understand what is being said. Individuals may have connection problems. And also, when there are a lot of people in a single meeting, there can be a slight delay, which means that multiple students may start speaking at the same time. With chat, there's the challenge of keeping up with the conversation while also trying to type. And because of that delay, there may be multiple conversations happening all at once. And the primary disadvantage of asynchronous discussion is that it creates a challenge to build community. But there are ways to get around that. The author of the book that I cited at the beginning of this video cites several studies that found that frequent posts to discussion boards is tied to student achievement and completion of courses. Another study that I found separately said that, particularly for students who struggle more, the more that they participated in the course discussion, the higher their grades were on their exams. So what is the instructor's role in getting students engaged and thinking and learning through course discussions in an online course? One very important part of the instructor's role in facilitating good discussions is setting up expectations. Students in general, and particularly Lycoming students, are likely to have less idea of what the class norms are in an online class than they would be in a class that met face-to-face. So some things that you might need to do are set up netiquette, which is a term for how students are expected to behave online. We've all seen people have the tendency to be a lot meaner online with the anonymity of an avatar, and there are ways to prevent that from happening. One suggestion is to make sure that all students have a thumbnail image associated with their Moodle account. And with Moodle, there's an advantage that students have to use their real name. But you may need to set up further guidance, such as making sure that students, when they disagree, are not attacking other students, and keeping the discussion productive and constructive. When setting up these expectations, you may want to get student input. This may be an exercise at the very beginning of the semester where students brainstorm what is expected, specifically with discussion. I have done this with dress codes in public speaking, and it worked very well. This can also be done by putting your syllabus in perusal and allowing students to annotate and comment on what the policies are and make adjustments based on what the students as a community decide. From what I have read about online learning, discussion participation is almost always a requirement, and you will want to share that at the beginning of the semester. And when you do that, you probably want to be very explicit on why you use discussion as a pedagogical strategy in your online classes. The next part of an instructor role is establishing the structure of your discussions. And one thing that you'll have to decide is how you balance student and instructor involvement. Instructors should be involved with class discussions, but they should play the guide on the side rather than participating as a student or policing discussions except in extreme cases. Also, the professor wants to make sure they don't answer the question and shut off the discussion too soon. And as another aspect of this, an instructor will need to decide how they are going to grade student participation in discussions, whether they're getting a letter grade for the quality of thought or whether they're getting a grade simply for participation, or whether the grade is based on something else. And finally, instructors need to ask good questions. So often, discussion quality among students is established by the questions and guidelines set by the instructor. So this may be establishing initial discussion starters. It may be asking probing questions in the middle of a discussion to get students to think more deeply. And in the discussion book, he also cites the 4-question technique, in which case, as professors are designing their discussion questions, they think about what they're trying to accomplish with that particular discussion and assign it one of 4 question types. And these 4 are analyzing questions, reflecting questions, relating questions, and questioning questions. And so you can line up your goals for that discussion with those kinds of questions and design the questions accordingly. So in addition to the tips provided in the discussion of the instructor's role in leading online discussions, here are a few practical tips to use in your courses. The first is that you can eavesdrop on discussions. And this does not have to be creepy, and this can be both synchronous and asynchronous. If you decide to have synchronous discussions and you break students into smaller discussion groups through breakout rooms, you can rotate through the rooms and drop in, make it very clear that you are in the rooms, and see how things are going. In discussion forums, it is easy to check on how a group discussion is going, and you can ask those probing questions if the discussion has stalled. And by eavesdropping on these discussions, you get an idea of what students are talking about and where they are taking their discussions and what they're likely to be learning from those discussions. The second tip is to give discussion prompt choices. Giving students choices helps them feel in control, and this has come up in several of the topic videos that I have already created, such as trauma-informed pedagogy and motivation. It also helps students who may get a prompt and not be inspired by the prompt or totally have a blank mind about a particular prompt, but they react more strongly to a different prompt. So there are many benefits to giving students choices. The third tip is to build social presence and community. And this is a really big and complicated topic. So in this video, I just want to point out this is something that can really help establish effective and engaged discussion. I plan to separately create another video on how you develop social presence and community in an online class. The fourth tip is have groups summarize discussions. So if you break discussion groups into smaller groups, you can have members take turns summarizing what the group discussed. This has several benefits, including the valuable thought exercise of having to summarize what could be a lengthy discussion into a short amount of text. This also eases your grading, as you can simply grade the group based on the summary rather than grading students' individual contributions. And it also becomes a study resource for students to use in preparing for exams and essays in the class. And the last tip is to consider self-graded participation. Howard provides more information about how students can grade their own perception of how well they have participated, and points to some other resources for more in-depth information on self-grading of discussion participation. So in addition to these tips, I want to give you 3 very brief case studies. The first 2 come from 2 humanities professors at Lycoming College who are willing to share with me some information on how they handled discussion, as discussion is particularly prevalent in humanities courses such as literature. In the first case study, the professor that I talked to used Zoom to continue class discussions in a very similar format to how he had done it before. The professor showed the text that they were talking about by sharing his screen, and he also shared related videos and other materials to stimulate the conversation. He used breakout rooms so that students were in groups of 2 or 3 to discuss the course content. He would move through those breakout rooms and see how they were doing with the questions that he had provided and check in with the students. In the second case study, the professor used the discussion forums and found that that worked very well for the particular class she was teaching. She would post at least 5 questions per week and required students to respond to at least 2 of those questions. She did find that students didn't respond to each other's comments as much as she would have liked, and that's something that she would work on if teaching a literature course online again. But she said she found that the students took those discussion questions and went in very unique directions and made the discussion their own, and she was very happy with the participation and thinking that her students did in the Moodle discussion forums. And the last case study is a hypothetical one, in that I have been thinking about how I would move my first year seminar to an online format if I needed to, as I prepared these videos for this online guide. The last time I taught this class, I asked 2 prompts as low-stakes writing activities, and my goal was to get students to tie themes that we were seeing in the things that we were reading and are very common in vampire literature to their lives. So in this prompt, you can see how I introduce the theme as it ties to the literature, and then ask students to tell me about a time that they should have spoken up and did not. In another prompt, I ask students to tell me about a time that their perspective changed. So these questions tie themes to their lives and also serve as a launching point for the first essay in the class. One thing I did learn in setting this up is that the default in Moodle is when you write a prompt in a discussion, Moodle will send an email to everyone who's enrolled in the class. And as I was using an old class that had a few professor friends enrolled in it, they all got emails. So be cognizant of what the settings are in your discussion forums about how many emails your students are going to be getting from each discussion forum, and set those to keep those notifications reasonable. Discussion has a lot of value in in-person classes, as many Lycoming College professors know. And it can translate well online, but there are many choices that you'll have to make depending on what your goals are for those course discussions. So hopefully this video helps give you some ideas. And for more information, I highly recommend the Discussion in College Classrooms book. Thank you very much for watching this video.